This just doesn't make sense.
Leah's got her duck boots.
Okay.
She's good. She's ready to shovel some snow.
Go.
She can drive that skid steer and clear it out for you. Good. All right, Smithville Board of Aldermen work session is now called to order. First item on the agenda, the only item on the agenda is the city attorney review of policy and practices. Hand it over to you two.
Thank you very much, Mayor and Board of Aldermen. Before you tonight, just on your dais is a kind of brief, I try to make it brief, it's still 7 pages, outline, kind of discussing some general best practices that we always want to make sure our new clients are aware of. Obviously, when it comes to things like order of business and your meetings, we have no complaints. I think we've been here for a total of 10 minutes of meetings and the 2 that we've been to. So obviously you're doing that pretty well, but there are some things that I kind of wanted to highlight that we've just noticed over this first month of acting as the city attorney. The first page is, some people would call it a table of contents. I just call it a roadmap. It kind of gives just the brief where we're going. And also if you ever need to review this again, which you probably won't, but if you ever need to, you can kind of check that and see exactly where something was brought up. But so one of the first things is ordinance approval. Section 79.130 for 4th class cities is what you guys are under. It does allow an ordinance to be read by title in the same meeting. I understand that over the past few years, the city has decided instead of utilizing that to instead just do it at 2 meetings. There's actually some discussion in your board packet or your board rules of order about, placing it on the consent agenda for 1 reading and then on the action for another. But I did just want to highlight that you can do both readings by title in a single meeting, mainly for the second thing in C, and that's ministerial actions, aka our good housekeeping time. So everything I'm going to note in here, these are all things where typically, due to their nature, having an extra week doesn't do anything. Like there's no no public comment, no new item could be brought up that would make the board able to either change their mind legally when it comes to plats or to get out of some sort of yearly contract that we've always been entering into. For example, one with like Mark or the school district or a fire district. Those typically are kind of yearly agreements that a lot of people enter into that there isn't really changing them. MoDOT agreements would be another one because MoDOT doesn't really negotiate. They just kind of hand it to you and say, here it is. But so the first sort of ministerial actions I wanted to discuss are plats. I cite to a case there at the bottom, Furlong Companies versus City of Kansas City. And whenever I bring this up, I always like to give a little bit of backstory about it. So Furlong Companies was attempting to build a gas station, Burger King, car wash, and a Wendy's at the intersection of Minor and Holmes Road. I can tell you what the outcome of the case is because I have filled up my car at that gas station. I have eaten at that Burger King and Wendy's, and I have washed my car at that car wash. So the City Council of Kansas City denied the plat for no real reason. The plat complied with everything that was within the Kansas City Code of Ordinances regarding to platting. They just still decided to deny it. Furlong Companies sued, utilized Section 1983, which allows for attorney's fees. So not only did the city ultimately have to approve the plat and that's the development, but they also had to pay $900,000 in attorney's fees to the Furlong Companies. But so whenever Jack is bringing a plat to you all that's gone through the Planning Commission, it's going to meet all of the code provisions, or else it would have already been sent back before it started coming through the process. There is no ability for the Board of Aldermen to all of a sudden be like, yeah, we're not going to approve that. So when it comes to ordinances approving those plats, there is a lot of time, even cities that don't do double reads similar to you guys, they will still do a single meeting reading just because it makes no difference. If it's we approve both readings tonight or we approve them over 2 meetings, the only thing we're doing is just having a 2-week delay before the developer can go and record this with the county recorder's office. So that one, and then also I think this, because this is coming up, but destruction of records. So destruction of records is controlled by the Secretary of State's retention policy and state law that says when they can be destroyed. The city follows that. It's already cited in your code of ordinances that you follow it. So when Linda has gone through the process of reviewed which records are no longer needing to be retained pursuant to the retention schedule, most of the time they've also already been laser fished or scanned in, and there's already an electronic copy, and brings about an ordinance to destroy the copies of those records, the hard copies. That's another one of those things where, again, that's just purely ministerial housekeeping. We're not, a lot of times when members of the public might see destruction of records, they think that, we're legitimately just destroying a bunch of public records. That's not what we're doing. We've either already retained them in a longer term format, or they've met their retention schedule, and state law and the Secretary of State says, no, you don't need to, and you probably should not retain those because there is no merit to keeping them around. And then the final one is kind of our yearly or semi-regular reoccurring contracts. I think of those, some cities approve their agreements with MARC via ordinance. MARC, like regional solid waste, stuff like that. Those are all agreements that are the same every single year. They're changing dates and just handing them to you. Having an extra week in between, all it does is mean that either staff has to now attempt to get that ready 2 weeks earlier, thus maybe making it so that work that actually has work product that staff needs to be produced is either set to the side, or maybe it isn't concentrated on as fully, or it's just, hey, now we have to tell Mark, can you give us an extra week so that we can make sure to have this approved by the, the timeline of the expiration of the previous contract. So kind of high level overview, your current rules of order state that you can do double reads for emergency ordinances where time is of the essence. My suggestion would be to either remove that and just fully comply with state law, just a copy and paste of the statutory provision, and then it's really up to you all and staff's recommendation about whether or not it needs to be a single or double read, or alternatively put something into those rules of order that calls out those kind of ministerial housekeeping matters can be approved via a one meeting double reading of the title. The next one is contracting. I always bring this up just because I'm not saying anybody's done anything wrong, but it's always good that the Board of Aldermen or the governing body in general has an understanding of what are the rules for contracts as they relate to municipalities. So in the state of Missouri, there's a statutory section 432-070, which we generally refer to as the Municipal Statute of Frauds, that sets out certain requirements of all contracts with municipalities. The four main ones for you all would be that it is in writing, that's how it gets before you, that the consideration is to be performed wholly after the contract's execution. So basically somebody can't come in, do a bunch of services, and then come to the city and be like, hey, I want to be paid for those now, and submit a contract. That it is executed by somebody at the city, an agent of the city, and that authorization is in writing. That's why you'll see with some of the resolutions that have contract purchases, we will say it's hereby approved by the Board of Aldermen, and so is authorized to execute the same on behalf of the city. But so those are, in law school at UMKC at least, we're kind of taught in legal writing the phrase that pays, which is the phrase that you need to always utilize every single time that you're doing something. And so for contracts, one of the main things that the Board of Aldermen should be aware of is that when we're approving those, you'll always see that sort of, it is hereby approved by us, and so is hereby authorized to execute it in writing. Now, this will be on resolutions. If there's even an approval of a contract via motion, I'll write it out and make sure that the city clerk has a copy of it beforehand, because I can be a little long-winded, but it will still say those two main key terms: approved and authorized for execution on behalf of the city. And when it comes to 432-070, it's actually an interesting statutory provision because it's a requirement put on cities to enter into contracts, but realistically in litigation, it is most likely used as a shield instead of a sword. So when contractors, when other parties that believe that there is some sort of oral agreement with the city to do something, bring a cause of action against the city or attempt to collect payment from the city for some service provided, 432.070 stands as a way to prevent that. And it's under the notice to potential contractors provision, but courts have determined that anybody doing work or potentially entering into contracts with cities are made aware and are on notice that 432.070 exists and that mandatory compliance is necessary for there to be a valid contract. Next, kind of under this contracting provision is our purchasing policy. I would note your all's purchasing policy is in the Code of Ordinances. That is not something that I necessarily would advocate for. If you think about a purchasing policy, what it is directions to staff on what process needs to be undertaken to ensure that public funds are spent appropriately and with a solid contractor. So that is not, the Code of Ordinances is our laws. It's outward facing, right? It's so, everybody knows when they come into the city of Smithville that to get a plat approved, you need to hit X, Y, and Z. Internal facing things like a purchasing policy, because again, that is purely internal, that is something that I would suggest instead be in a policy manual or adopted by resolution. The biggest reason for that is under Missouri law, typically there is no right of a bidder that did not get selected to challenge the award. However, when you start putting stuff into the Code of Ordinances, thus making it a law, a property right can flow from that. So what you sometimes see is bidders that didn't win attempting to strong arm cities by saying, yeah, generally we cannot bring a claim because we have no property right, but you all have in your Code of Ordinances laws that create property rights for bidders on city RFQs or RFPs, thereby that provision does not apply and we do have the ability to challenge your award. Below that, obviously I've now scared you, but when it comes to determining lowest and best, we are given significantly wide discretion. Courts have already laid out non-exhaustive lists of things that should be considered. It's in B32, A through C there, but honesty and integrity of the bidder, bidder's skill and business judgment, bidder's experience and facilities carrying out the contract, previous conduct by the bidder, and the quality of the bidder's previous work. So if you look at all those things, that's why whenever the city issues an RFP or an RFQ, it is not just to the lowest bidder. We typically don't want the cheapest bidder. You want the lowest and best bidder so that you can ensure that not only are public funds being expended wisely as towards the contract price, but also that we will actually get what we are bargaining for. The next kind of best practices section is the Sunshine Law. My key with the Sunshine Law is always to have a clear and strong policy that is reviewed regularly. So the reason for this is not only so that members of the public and the staff know that, hey, we are complying with the Sunshine Law, here's our policy, this is what we do, but also there is an automatic defense to Sunshine Law litigation when a staff member or a member of the Board of Aldermen has complied with that policy. So compliance with the policy thus makes it so that civil liability does not arise, meaning that if the city or the Board of Aldermen were ever sued for a Sunshine Law violation and all that was done was following the policy, even if for some reason the policy is out of date and no longer in compliance with the Sunshine Law, there is a defense and we do not have to actively pay any civil penalties in that litigation. Also, key thing in all policies is to have a statement that all records that can be closed are closed and they are only opened by an action of the Board of Aldermen. So one of the reasons for this is back in the 90s, there were quite a few cities that just didn't want to list out at the time the 20, now it's like 29 different reasons to close records. And so a lot of them would miss personnel records. Those would not be included because the thought was why would we need to state that those are closed? Those are obviously closed under the Sunshine Law. And then because they were not stated as closed, there was never any action to close them, no affirmative action by the governing body to close them. They were actually open, and thus people's personnel records could be reviewed by members of the public. And that was a situation that was quite embarrassing for a couple of cities that happened to. The next one that we always want to highlight with the sunshine law is obviously everybody here is pretty used to the 24-hour notice provision. The city actually provides more. You guys post on what, Thursday? So you guys are automatically already posting significantly ahead of time. Realistically, posting for your all's meetings on Tuesday at 6 could be done on Monday. Instead, we already back it up. But there is a provision in Missouri law. It's not even in the sunshine law. It's a side reference. It sometimes is missed by attorneys, but it's section 672725. And it actually requires a longer notice period if the Board of Aldermen or the governing body is going to be considering certain topics. Those topics are implementing a tax increase, which, given the Hancock Amendment, is kind of confusing on what exactly is the meeting where you're implementing a tax increase, because the meeting where you impose it and call the election for the sales tax, you're not implementing anything because it's still subject to the approval of the voters. So then is it the next meeting where the voters have already approved it? So it's already going to be put in place. And then the major ones that sometimes get missed are with retail development projects. Whenever the city is going to be considered utilizing eminent domain, which this is a holdover of pre-2008 sort of development when people utilized eminent domain to clean up properties that they wanted to utilize retail development for. The creation of a transportation development or a community improvement district. Again, this is also confusing. Community improvement districts are approved. The petition is approved and they are formed by the Board of Aldermen. Transportation development districts are not. Those take going to the circuit court to actually have the circuit court approve them. So I'm still kind of unsure what meeting that is that we'd have to post a 4-day notice for, and so is everybody. But the Missouri legislature knows better than us. And then the final one is the approval of redevelopment plans where public funds are pledged as financing for the project. Broadly, some people consider this just your general TIF or potentially a general Chapter 353 plan. More likely, the interpretation is that it's for when you are going to be issuing TIF obligations, which those are actually, because you don't pledge revenues when you approve a TIF, just generally. You instead say that we will collect them, put them in the special allocation fund. You have a development agreement that then says every year we'll transfer those to the developer. However, they are pledged when the city would issue TIF bonds, and those bonds would have as a pledge of revenue the special allocation fund. The nice thing about this provision, and why I think not a lot of people even really worry about it, is the statute of limitations to bring an action for violation of it is 30 days. So it is an incredibly quick turnaround where basically somebody would already have to know the day that they are walking in that the city did not do the 4-day notice. If it's discovered later, say it's 2 weeks later, you are all of a sudden having to turn a petition to challenge something by a city and getting it on file in a 2-week time frame, which is incredibly fast. Our final one is public comments. Just you guys already have a pretty decent public comment section up there, but this is something that we like to make everybody aware of. But the purpose of Board of Aldermen meetings is for the Board of Aldermen to conduct its business, i.e. the approval of resolutions, the approval of ordinances, stuff like that. The case law, and we're getting into a very fuzzy area of First Amendment because the Supreme Court over the past 30 years has never taken up a case to clarify. So we have different circuits using different terms, utilizing some different phrases that can completely change. But our circuit has generally considered public comment during Board of Aldermen meetings as what's called a limited designated public forum, meaning it is not what is considered a traditional designated public forum, which that is like your sidewalks. Those are the places where people have throughout history utilized their right to free speech, to protest, to do stuff like that. And said Board of Aldermen meetings, again, as they are meetings that their primary purpose is for the board to conduct business, are limited because it is the board is under no legal obligation to provide a public comment section. Instead, the board has decided that public comment is something that they are okay with hearing, subject to certain reasonable rules. And so it is instead a limited public forum. I went ahead and took a look at, again, it's Rule 7 in your rules of order. And even for the most strict forums, the city can still impose what are called time, place, manner restrictions. Time would obviously be when or how long. Your all's is 3 minutes. And then place here, because you're opening the public forum. We've already said the place. It is here and it is right at that desk. And then manner is, there are some slight changes, but the manner for you all is mainly decorum held, and then items that are on either the action agenda or that are still issues that are under and subject to your purview. So your all's public comment section, as is currently drafted, is even more open to public comment than what it could be. It could be even narrower. It could state specifically under the limited designated public forum, the city is authorized to regulate content as long as it is not viewpoint. So for content, one of the things that you'll see some cities implement is not only does it have to be an issue that the Board of Aldermen could address generally, it has to be an issue that the Board of Aldermen is actively addressing at that meeting. And the case law kind of bears out. And one of the keys whenever we start getting into First Amendment rights is that there has to be some sort of compelling government interest that we are attempting to protect via the regulation. And most of the case law is incredibly clear, but I think it is just under 4A, kind of all of them. But it's already been stated, there is a significant governmental interest in conducting orderly, efficient meetings of public bodies. Obviously, I think 3 and 7 minute meetings are pretty efficient, if you ask me. And then the further one is the right versus Anthony in subsection 2I. But a speaker may disrupt a city council meeting by speaking too long, by being unduly repetitious, or by extended discussion of irrelevancies. That's kind of the provision from case law that cities utilize for the keeping it on to stuff that's simply on the agenda. And also, if anybody wants to be really bored, you can go back and look at when Parkville approved the Creekside development. There were so many people there that at that meeting, to avoid every meeting lasting 7 to 8 hours, we actually had to call a couple of them at midnight and just say, everybody go home. We actually changed the public comment provision to, if somebody was up at the dais or the speaker's podium saying something that you agreed with and that you intended to get up to say, put your hand up, raise your hand, so that we don't end up with 40 public comments saying the exact same thing in the exact same manner about the exact same stuff over and over and over again. But your all's public comment stuff in Rule 7, I mean, you have 3 minutes for items not listed on the action agenda. The limitation on on action item agenda items is 3 minutes, but that's still, the mayor would have to take an affirmative action and state that. And then also, again, you do follow what I believe is a good model, which on action item agendas, you can limit overall discussion by saying, hey, each side's going to get 10 minutes. Get up, everybody say your piece, make sure that you know what you guys are going to say it so that we can, kind of move on and continue with this. I think one of the interesting things too about the public forum analysis, especially at Board of Aldermen meetings and meetings of public bodies, in light of social media and email, it is much easier now for members of the public to voice their concerns to members of the board than it ever has been in the past. I mean, previously you'd have to take out something in the local paper, print it on there, and hope that the governing body or a member of it read it. Instead now, I mean, you could post it on Facebook, tag everybody in it. You could send most of the board's emails are even listed places. You can email them directly via that. The city hall has a phone number that's available. You could call the phone number, say, hey, I want to leave a message with the mayor and discuss that way. So that's one of the reasons why all courts have kind of been okay with limiting the public comment to a limited designated public forum because there are so many alternative means of communication. And in light of the case law determining that the purpose of public meetings is for the board to conduct its business, public comment is an additional thing that governing bodies can allow. But since it is just something that they can allow, they're not mandated to allow, there is the ability to regulate it a little bit more than what you can regulate speech on a sidewalk. And that is everything that I have. 25 minutes. Glad I got it in because I was the one that said that this work session only had to be 30 minutes and I didn't want to go over.
You have 6 minutes to spare, so.
Mayor, if I might also, just as a follow-up, and we've had in the, 3 meetings now, Patrick and Jackson have been out since appointment. Management team, they attend staff meeting and we talk about a number of these items. One of the things that we as staff want to do is to go through that policy manual. We're currently reviewing the policy manual, the handbook, and just some of our general practices. There's some duplication of something. There are just some things that have evolved over time that we're working on some cleanup, and that's why we wanted to bring these items forward, get any feedback the board might have to help direct staff in working with Patrick and Jackson and an update to those documents to bring to you all as this is kind of a winter work plan for staff to continue working through these items. And so any feedback helps us
And I will,
develop those policies.
I will say in our review, there was never anything that it was like, oh my God, stop doing that right now. You're violating the law. It was instead at most, hey, let's clarify this language. Let's change this slightly. We're not affecting anything in the past because it was still done properly, but this is more right, I think would be the kind of clarifying statement.
And I think also, particularly related that we have some things that are addressed in both the handbook and the policy manual, and we need to have them in the appropriate places and ensure, as things have multiple places, sometimes there are inconsistencies. And so we're working to clean those up as well.
Open up to you all to your work session. Get feedback for them.
I'll start.
Go for it.
I think anywhere we could streamline and clean up some of the process and make it smoother for everybody, I think that's a positive. So with what you've lined out here, it's like, okay, there's a couple of things it sounds like we could streamline for sure. And I would
Great.
appreciate that, I think.
We didn't have 2-second readings. It'd be 1:30.
And that's obviously, when I was even drafting that section, I was kind of like, this is a little ridiculous given how quick your guys' meetings already are. But a lot of communities, the reason why they have those double readings is because meetings don't last 7 minutes. And so it's like, well, we don't want to have to make the developer or the applicant come in and have to sit through another hour-long meeting where they've brought, their legal counsel, and maybe you guys had to bring in special counsel. So there's special, the city's paying special counsel, stuff like that. But generally our kind of rule that I think is pretty easy to follow is that when it comes to ministerial or housekeeping items where that sort of 2-week time period does essentially nothing, but just take another 2 weeks, then it's sometimes the thought is, are we just extending timeframes to extend timeframes? And I know, especially when it comes to plats and planning, like when you look at how those work, I mean, you are looking back months to set the date of when it will be finally approved. A plat has already gone through the planning commission. They've already discussed it, reviewed it, had a meeting over it. Then all of a sudden it comes to the board. Now the board has 2 more meetings. So just in the time frame from when it was under consideration, when it is ministerial and there is nothing that we can do to change it because it complies with everything in there, we've just added 1.5 months. When we could, obviously it still has to be a certain time frame because it has to go to both, but we could cut some of that time frame off, thus easing not only Jack's schedule, but also instead of developers having to try and rush stuff because, oh, we want to start this build season, maybe we're not quite ready, but there's a 6-week time frame for approval. Okay, we need to start getting on this 4 months in advance so that we can start the discussions with Jack, so that we can make sure that, hey, does this meet everything? Are we within your guys' normal boundaries? If we're not, then all of a sudden they're going back and changing it, then we're pushed again, all for something that whenever a plat is before one of our governing bodies and there's, at least the discussion of, hey, the city council or the governing body might deny it. My first thing is always like, no, like bring up the furlong case. Again, I've eaten at that Burger King, I've eaten at that Sonic, I've gotten gas at that gas station. Denying plats that comply is just a really easy way to, add to what I always joke as the Corcoran College Fund. You're not doing anything, you're not building new roads, you're not building new streets with that money, you're just paying attorneys with it.
So I agree with Alderman Wilson in just the sense if we can streamline some of this, I think it's important. I often ask myself when something comes in, I'm a little bit different because I'm involved in real estate and development. Is this ministerial or is this administrative, right? I mean, and that's important to know. And maybe the staff can look at just the fact that we can kind of project that this is ministerial, although it could be obvious to some, not obvious to others. And I think that's an important fact because a lot of times this has been vetted, if you will, through planning and zoning, right? I mean, either or, the process has been months, sometimes years. And so when it gets to us, it's just a lot of that work has been done. And it doesn't mean that it's not important to hear from public on that. But the time to do it is when it's through planning and zoning. And the time to do that is certainly, again, I'm not discouraging anyone to come to our meetings and not have public comment on that. And then, on the public comment, I just want to make sure that we understand that this is important to our community and our citizens, but also there's got to be some guardrails or guidelines, and I think that's there. And it's important because we're in a time and age where the safety of elected officials is being questioned, right? I mean, we shouldn't have to question our safety. We're citizens. We live in the community, but this is happening at the alderman and council level. This is happening at the state level. This is happening at the national level. And so I know times people can be very charged and I'll just, put that out there that we're just like every individual. We've just stepped forward and be elected officials, but to understand that when it's public comment, doesn't give you the opportunity to threaten an individual. That's just uncalled for. And I hope that, I think most every citizen understands that. But there have been times in ours that there's been statements of threats. And that's something that I hope that people will understand in public comment moving forward. So
I'd like to add accusations too. Public comment.
I would note, even when you start looking at like the law review articles, because that's always a place where, that's where the most up-to-date stuff is always discussed. That's where the cases that maybe aren't even being reported in our case law books, instead they're just kind of going by the wayside, but they might have interesting facts. If you even look at all of those law review articles, one of the purposes of regulations when it comes to public comment is just plain and simple decorum. I know that in my 10 years, I've been to a couple meetings. One of them that I think of often because it was pretty wild included about an hour and a half of public comment that I would say 90% of it was not on point at all. And it caused a prospective developer and their attorney to, sitting in the back of the council chambers, just kind of hanging out, waiting for our turn. And they both came up to me during the middle of public comment and were like, because this was a new to market business, just flat out said, we don't want to be here anymore. And they were like, you pull it from the agenda. We're actually just gonna, we might come back, but this was gonna be the first to market. We're gonna go find a different community for the first to market. So that's always just a thought where it's like, there are externalities about making sure that the decorum of a public body's meeting is complied with. And that's, again, I'd note that your guys' public comment stuff right now, I'm not saying you need to change any of it. It's pretty much directly on point with what most communities do. It's actually getting a little bit more open than some of the communities I represent. I have one community where to be on public comment, you have to contact the mayor on the Thursday before the meeting. So you'd have to contact the mayor to be put on the agenda without knowing what was on the agenda. So.
I would just add on to that too. I mean, it's like we talked about, it's a limited public forum for the most part when we talk about public comment. And it's a privilege to be able to address council, board of aldermen, whatever the board, governing board is for a city. So there needs to be decorum, and I agree with what you guys are saying.
I just wanted to make a comment that like in regards to the public comment, I think what we have in place right now is pretty well. I do understand where others have kind of crossed those blurred lines. But in regards to giving the public an opportunity to come and speak, I think that has shown, especially since the short time I've been here, to be very influential in regards to some topics. And I do think that not everybody does pay attention to social media, and I shouldn't, assume that if somebody makes a post online that I'm gonna see it along with everybody else that's up here. Because I've had people say that they don't get responses from other people in other directions. So I think in regards to the comments and the public comment, I think it's well-rounded and very structured. We do not have long meetings. I don't really see that that is a bad thing, but I also think from being newly appointed, um, from someone who is on the outside looking in, you kind of wonder, well, how did they come to that conclusion? How do they understand that? Because for me, I take time to process, so I know all of this information is well provided, and you gave a great presentation, but I need to digest. And Cynthia knows I will send her like a question, an email, like 5 a day. But in regards to everything provided, I think that your information was very well put together and I appreciate it. So thank you.
Yeah, it was, again, just to note, none of this was advocating for any
No,
direct changes. It was just, this is what we've seen, and this is also all information that, I think as members of a governing body of a city with a significant budget, with, significant things going on, having more information and being more knowledgeable just about some of the stuff that's happening maybe around you that you aren't necessarily as tuned into because it's not a big matter to a member of the governing body is important so that you all know exactly. It's like, okay, this is why we do something like this. This is why this thing says this the way it does. This is why maybe staff is saying, hey, can we do a double read on a plat? Something like that.
Do you need, like, on the purchasing policy, do you need anything from us, like, to get that changed to where it's not an ordinance versus?
I think if that is the route that we go down, there would
Okay.
have to be, obviously, we can't just say,
But-
never
but I
mind
know what you needed
ordinances.
From us tonight to make that happen, I guess what I'm asking.
I think right now it's just that kind of general understanding
Okay.
of, okay, this is the direction you want us to move in. We will have to make the
Okay.
recommended changes, bring those forward for your guys' review. And that's what, yeah. So I think what I'm hearing is, what streamlines processes, no massive overhaul to anything.
Right.
But really kind of related to, I think from a streamlining perspective, it's that policy related to 2 readings of ordinances. And clearly communicating ministerial versus administrative. And I know we've already got some language in the RFAs, and I think we can beef some of that up as to particularly the history of the action so that you can read right there on the RFA, this is what's happened before, so that then people can go back to previous meetings. So and be very clear about that and be a little, maybe more thoughtful about that on staff side of ensuring we're including that information. Patrick or Jackson, anything else you guys see? We appreciate your guys' time on this. And like I said, there are several things that we're working through, reviewing with Patrick and Jackson, and you'll see those starting to come forward. So we had started looking at them as staff, but really wanted some input as to legal review, again, another set of eyes from legal review, and then because they represent so many communities in the area, kind of that best practices. What are the other places doing? So.
Cool. Anything else? Entertain a motion to adjourn work session.
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn work session.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Meryl, second.
All those in favor of adjourning work session, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. Stand adjourned work session, and we'll just roll into the regular, right? Can you start over the video? Or is it listed as both? Oh, okay. We'll take a pause for the cause.